Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and we're going to continue our lecture today talking about evidence that supports the theory of evolution. I gave y'all a couple of examples last time I saw y'all, and I'm going to talk about a couple more today. So let's go ahead and get the ball rolling on this. So one thing I wanted to talk about today is something known as the fossil record. Okay, what is the fossil record? The fossil record is a collection of all discovered fossils. Fossils are arranged chronologically based on their location within sedimentary rock layers. The fossil record shows strong evidence for evolution by showing how organisms have changed over time. The fossil record is incomplete. Most organisms do not leave behind a fossil, and of those that do, not all have been found. So we can track how organisms have changed over time by looking at the fossil record. We can see this in humans. I talked about how in whales we could see the hip bone. It's still around today, even though they don't have a hind limb. So studying the fossil record is a great insight on what life used to be like in the past and how it's changed to where it is today. So a little bit more information about the fossil record. The fossil record shows how organisms have changed over time. Remember that evolution is change over time. That's the best way to put evolution. I know there's a lot of people talk about evolution and what it means and all this other stuff. Evolution is just change over time. We're all changing every single day, right? If you stub your toe on the coffee table in the morning when you're getting ready for school, the next day you're going to make sure you don't do that. Maybe you take a wider route around the coffee table. Maybe you make sure the lights are turned on so you can see a little bit better. So we're always changing, right? And evolution is just change over time. We can trace how early humans have evolved through the fossil record. So a couple of big things that we can track through hominins and early humans and how we got here today. We can see how today we see these apes and monkeys. A lot of times they're like walking around on four limbs. We can see that change happen in the fossil record for humans when we stopped walking on all fours and we started to be more bipedal, which is walking on two legs. The arrangement of the hip bones is a little bit different. The angle of the femur or the leg bones they point inward a little bit more. There's a really famous fossil called Lucy that we found in Africa that we can find a lot of these different changes on. Another really important change I wanted to point out for humans is let's take a look at this picture right here, and we'll zoom in just a second. You see that fossil with that little bony part sticking out of the top of the head there? That's called a sagittal crest. And what's going on is this little part right here is known as a sagittal crest. So humans have not always been cooking food with fire. Before we knew how to control fire, we were scared of it, just like most animals are today. Well, when you start cooking food, it makes food much easier to chew, right? Cooking meat destroys or makes that connective tissue around the meat a little bit easier to chew. If you're eating more meat, you're not eating as much grasses and plants and stuff like that. Well, at one point, before we knew how to cook using fire, we were chewing our food a lot more. The food was much tougher because we weren't cooking it. We were eating more plants because we couldn't cook the meat as easily. And so we're chewing our food a lot more. Well, if you're chewing your food, if you're chewing your food as much as they were back then, you need more chewing muscles. And so what's happening here, this is a sagittal crest on the top of the skull of this organism. And what it did, it was an extra spot for these big chewing muscles to wrap around the head and have something to connect to. So some early humans have this sagittal crest, but once humans started to use fire to cook their food, you see that this sagittal crest starts to disappear. And a lot of these other hominins or early human fossils don't have that sagittal crest. And that tells us that they were probably using fire to cook their food. So those are just a couple of things that we can track using the fossil record. By looking at how fossils look today and looking how they used to look millions of years ago, you can compare them and see how they're different. And so that's a really strong piece of evidence that supports the theory of evolution. Something else I wanted to talk about is molecular evidence. This is a more recent thing in the past 20 or 30 years. Now that we know how to sequence DNA, we can use this to get a better picture of what's going on. So molecular evidence, this is like studying DNA. There is strong evidence that supports the theory of evolution based on similarities in DNA and protein sequences. All living organisms use the same basic code, DNA. And because we all share the same basic code, we do share common DNA across all organisms. One of our closest relatives is the chimpanzee. Humans and chimpanzees share 98% the same DNA. So all the differences in between a chimpanzee and a human comes down to just a 2% difference in our DNA. But we also share DNA with things that don't seem related to us at all, such as a zebrafish or even a mustard seed. We share our DNA, we share similar DNA with fish and plants. Even though we're not alike at all, we still share some of the basic coding of our DNA is the same because we're still using the same proteins. So this is a way, basically you sequence all the DNA in an organism, you can find which ones are most common or the most alike, and that gives you a better idea of who's more closely related and who are you not as closely related to. So that's how we can use DNA to find those relationships, okay? Something else I wanted to talk about is known as biographical distribution. Okay? In evolutionary studies, this refers to examining the geographical distribution of species across the Earth. This distribution supports evolutionary theory by showing how species adapted to specific regions and spread over time, influenced by factors like continental drift and environmental changes. As a result, closely related species are often found in different areas that were once connected. And what I wanted to end on today is these couple of pictures, okay? Especially this picture on the right. You can see that this is a finch. A finch is a type of bird. Well, this was the type of organism that Darwin was studying, and we'll talk about Darwin a lot later on. What he found is that you can find there's a finch that lives in the Galapagos Island. And when the finch first got there, they had a very standard beak, okay? The Galapagos Island is like an island chain, so it has a lot of different islands around it, okay? What he saw when he got to the Galapagos Islands, he saw that the finches all looked very similar. The main thing that was different between them was their beak. And what he figured out is that depending on what type of food was available for the finches, their beak kind of grew or evolved to make eating that type of organism or that type of diet easier. So at the top, this beak is very sharp and small. It's good for eating insects, kind of like getting into the bark of a tree, finding an insect, and eating it. This next one is shaped a little bit different, and it's related to what it was eating. Down here, this one is very good. This is a big beak. This one's good for cracking open seeds and eating nuts. And there, that one in the middle, that's the woodpecker type of beak. So it's very sharp, it's long, it can get into the bark of the tree and find that insect that it's eating. And so what we started with one finch, they evolved into 3 different types of finches, and it was all based off of their location. There was different food on these different islands, and they had to grow to be better at eating that type of diet. So their beak kind of changed shape and size a little bit to make eating that diet a little bit easier. Thank y'all so much for following along with me today. Your teacher has some other work for you to do. Make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.